Welcome to Breaking Through Health Barriers. This is your host, Dr. Terry Wenner, bringing you education, motivation, and inspiration for healthy living. I'm an educator, a registered nurse, a health podcaster, blogger, and video creator, and I'm so glad you decided to listen in today. In today's episode, episode 14, we will be discussing grace and mercy, how to get and receive more of these in your life, and the importance of cutting yourself a break, all in the name of healthy living. And as always, be sure to keep an ear open for Dr. Terry Wenner's Health Tip and Challenge of the Week. So let's get started. Grace and mercy. If you've been listening to my show for a while, you know I love to start out our discussions with definitions so that everyone's clear on what we're talking about. So let's get started by looking at a definition for grace. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary actually lists 8 different components to the definition of grace, but today we're going to focus in on just one. We're going to look at an aspect of grace that's based in Christianity. However, no worries, if you're not a Christian, I believe that all people can choose to live a life based on grace. And since there happens to be a lot of Christians around, you may better understand where they're coming from when they use the term grace. So grace. Grace is unmerited divine assistance given to humans for their regeneration or sanctification. It also is known as a virtue coming from God, or lastly, a state of sanctification enjoyed through divine assistance. Well, that definition is a bit wordy, so it actually forces us to look up a couple other words too. So we're also going to explore regeneration and sanctification. So what is regeneration? Well, regeneration, just as the name sounds, it's a type of renewal or revival. It's taking something that's in bad shape and making it like new, or bringing something near death back to life. So here's an example of something that may help you understand this a little bit better. I am known for having a black thumb rather than a green thumb, and so I frequently find my plants near death. I'm not proud of this, but this is just reality. However, with enough TLC, and sometimes at the hands of someone else besides myself, some of my nearly dead plants have come back to life and actually lived vibrantly after that. Currently, I have a miniature rose bush on my kitchen table, and we were down to just a few stalks, and I thought, oh boy, this baby's going to die. We're going to have to throw this one out. And it's a very special plant because one of my students gave it to me from my last job. However, looking at this plant, it wasn't totally dead. These little branches weren't brown yet. They weren't totally lifeless. So I ended up doing some pruning and watering and feeding of this plant, and it's actually now thriving on my kitchen table. So it is possible to regenerate something that's pretty beaten up. So that's what regeneration talks about, and that is an aspect of grace. The other one is called sanctification, and it is the state of growing in divine grace as a result of Christian commitment after baptism or conversion. So it's a very spiritual-based experience. Being sanctified means being free from sin and set aside for a sacred purpose. So essentially, this means that for Christians, there's a time when God forgives your sins, and then He sets you apart to have a very special purpose. So those are some aspects of the Christian view of grace. Personally, I want to add a little extra viewpoint here. My favorite part of what we've said so far about grace is that it's unmerited favor. And that means that grace is not a reward for a job well done. It's not like getting a merit badge for a great accomplishment. The beauty of grace is that we didn't do anything to earn it or deserve it. Nevertheless, it can still be available at certain parts of our lives in certain times in our lives. And we're going to talk more about that in a little bit. But before we get too deep into grace, we're also talking about mercy today. So I also want to share a little bit with you about the definition of mercy. So back to Merriam-Webster. Merriam-Webster gives us only 3 aspects for the mercy definition, so we're going to look at all 3. The first aspect is compassion or forbearance, shown especially to an offender or one subject to one's power. So someone that is beneath you, that you have some kind of power over, you would choose to show compassion or forbearance if you were showing mercy. We are going to look at the definition of forbearance in a moment also. Another aspect of the definition is a blessing that is an act of divine favor or compassion, and compassionate treatment of those in distress. And, so I told you we we're going to look at forbearance. Forbearance means refraining from the enforcement of something that is due. And examples are debts or rights or obligations. So maybe somebody really has a debt to you, but in mercy, you are not going to make them repay that debt. You're going to let them off the hook. Like, that they are supposed to do such and such, but you're going to let them off the hook for that. So once again, I want to give you a little bit of a personal perspective on mercy. In a nutshell, mercy is not giving a person what they deserve. So where grace is giving someone something that they haven't earned, mercy is not giving them what they do deserve. And often these are negative things that people would rather not have anyway. A great example of this is one summer a few years ago, I taught a pharmacology course to nursing students. It was a pretty tough course, and the students had other courses going on at the same time, and all of their courses in the summer are in a very fast-paced, accelerated format. So in 6 or 8 weeks, they had to complete a whole course, and they were usually completing about 2 or 3 of them at a time. So I used to provide, when I would give a test, I would provide some blank space where students could write me notes or questions. If they wanted me to look at something a little closer, something they didn't think was clear, or something that was a typo, or something that was misleading, I wouldn't want them to interrupt during the class, so I asked them to write it on paper. Well, one student on the final exam wrote a very brief note that just said 3 words: "Please have mercy." Oh my gosh, this was one of the best notes I had ever received. The student was basically admitting that he or she didn't deserve an awesome grade, but nevertheless was hopeful that I would not give out what was truly earned. Honestly, this type of thing happened quite a few times in my academic career where students were hoping that they didn't get what they deserved. But this was the first and only time someone actually had the courage to write it down as a request, and I just thought this was totally awesome. So let's return to our discussion about grace now. So we basically have laid a basic definition for grace and mercy, and now we're going to dig a little bit deeper. So grace. Grace, again, is about unmerited favor. So my question would be, is this something that you want in your life? Do you want more of it? Do you think the people around you that you know and care about would want more grace too? Well, I think at first look or first thought, it does seem like something that would be desirable, right? So I'm going to share with you a few examples, and we can continue to ponder this question: do we want more grace in our lives? So first, a physical example of grace. In a physical sense, we might think about receiving money that we didn't earn, or some type of bonus just because somebody was particularly generous that day or tossed something extra our way. I used to give my son buzz cut haircuts for he was in the junior ROTC in high school, and after I had been doing it a while, I decided maybe I should get some real hairdresser equipment. So I ordered myself a cape, and I ordered one for my son as well. So I ordered 2 capes in the mail. The lady I purchased it from, I believe, was on eBay. And without my prompting at all, she decided to embroider my name on the cape that I would be wearing at no extra cost. So in a human sense, this was something that made me feel special. That a stranger who didn't even know me cared enough to want to put my name on something. I hadn't paid for it. I didn't really deserve it. But the question is, does this fit the definition of grace that we talked about earlier? Well, on the surface, it really doesn't appear to have anything to do with heavenly purposes, right? But whether this woman knew it or not, I had often struggled with feeling like I didn't live up to the expectation of those in authority in my life. School teachers, different coaches, even my parents at times. And I have also had experiences where I've been flat out told that I'll never be good enough to really fit in. So these things were a part of my upbringing. And while logically I could say, those were not based in truth, those are just opinions, and they really have no bearing on my life, but those comments still hurt. And I'm one of those people that if I got all A's in school, I'd be disappointed because they weren't all A pluses. So, when this person decided to embroider my name on a cape that I had ordered, it really did something more for me than just have a piece of fabric with my name on it. So let's look at that question again. Was embroidering my name on the hairdressing cape for free, without me asking for it, an act of grace or not? Well, to me, it was one small way of helping me remember that I'm unique, that I'm special, and that I do matter in this world. It helped set me apart as the home hairdresser named Terry Wenner. And it started to help with the regeneration process of my damaged self-esteem and my poor self-image. So for me, yes, indeed, I would have to say that it was an act of grace. So that was a physical example of grace, but there are other types too. Let's talk about emotional and relational examples of grace next. So in an emotional or relational sense, we might think about things like being forgiven for something that we did that hurt someone. They didn't have to forgive us, right? But they graciously decided to. Great examples of this are relationships where one partner has strayed and violated their marriage vows, but the other partner has shown grace and forgiven them and has made attempts to mend that broken relationship. An example of emotional grace is when someone may have lied about you or taken advantage of your friendship in some way. A normal human response would be to be angry and want to distance yourself from this person, or even give them a piece of your mind. However, emotional grace doesn't respond in that way. Emotional grace says, it's okay. Humans make mistakes, and I'm not going to let this one thing destroy our friendship. However, I would throw in a word of caution here. There's a difference between showing grace and enabling bad behavior. So forgiving someone for lying once is one thing. It can be a great thing. But allowing chronic behavior to continue is not okay. So if someone is continually lying or using you, trust is broken and grace can be taken advantage of. So just be careful that you're not doing more harm than good with your gracious actions. So returning to those questions again, is grace something you would want in your life? And do you think it's something that other people would want too? Well, this question is actually a little trickier than you might think at first. While it sounds great to receive grace, some people really struggle with this. They believe that they don't deserve it. And here they will go out and punish themselves for something. If someone let them off the hook, they'll go punish themselves. Or they will feel a sense of debt and carry this burden of debt around with them for weeks, months, even years, with this urgency of having to repay an imaginary debt. So these people are not really able to receive grace in the way it was intended to. So that can be a challenge. Another question is, how often do you demonstrate grace to others? I think this is a good question. Let me give you some ideas to think about. How do you tend to respond if someone takes the parking spot you were going for on a Saturday afternoon at the local mall? Or what about when someone butts in front of you in line when you're getting your lunch and you're famished? Or how about when a friend forgets to meet you somewhere and you stand there all alone feeling stood up? Well, the way we really respond tells a lot about what we think about grace. It's not fair to want and accept grace but never give it, is it? Well, likewise, it's not fair to yourself to always be a grace giver but not be a grace receiver. Additionally, what are you saying to the person or persons that were trying to show grace to you through their actions, are you saying that you reject their gift? In all likelihood, if you reject or discard their generous gift of grace once, you're probably not going to receive it again from that same person. They're going to feel like their gift was unwanted. It was not something that was of value to you. And in the end, I think you both lose. So the moral of the story on grace is that to be considered a truly healthy person and to really receive the benefits for our well-being, we need to be both grace givers and grace receivers, and we need to be both very often. What would a life without grace be like? Well, when we look around our world, I often see a lack of grace already. I've come to expect people to mouth off when things don't go their way. I anticipate that people will shout at the television set if they disagree with whomever happens to be speaking. And I prepare myself for the wrath that I will personally receive if I have to deliver bad news. Even in settings that might otherwise seem safe, we can often feel like we're in a bipolar world and we have no idea what types of responses we'll be getting. I don't know about you, but I really yearn for a world that's filled with grace. I want to live in a world that gives second chances and accepts occasional human error as normal. I'm not saying that I want all standards to disappear. For heaven's sakes, one of my job functions is in quality assurance. And, but really, we don't need to be hearing verbal baseball bats when something goes awry. We don't need to read social media posts accusing others of terrible things. And I might add, these nasty comments are often unfounded, or at the very least, being spoken by someone who's not an expert in that field in the first place. And here's a great example of this. I know very little about cars. Putting the key in and keeping the gas tank full and notifying somebody when I have lights that come on is pretty much the extent of it. So if something actually needs repair, I would have no idea, what needed to be fixed. If I took it to someone who was an expert in car mechanics, I wouldn't know if they were telling me the truth or not. I wouldn't know if I was getting a good price or not. I certainly might try to look up some things online, but ultimately I don't know much about car mechanics. So if I were to start mouthing off about how I thought all car mechanics were, ripping people off or something like that, it really would be unfounded in most cases, and I would be talking about something that I know nothing about. So that's ridiculous. We don't need more of that in the world, but I just turn on your internet or the television and you will hear lots and lots of graceless comments. The only way we're going to see more grace in our world is to be active givers and receivers of grace ourselves. It has to start with us. Okay, now let's look at mercy a little bit further. Let's talk a little bit more about mercy. It's the second half of our main topic today, and as we've said previously, it's not giving people what they do deserve, right? So as a former university professor, which I already mentioned, I often think of grades when I think of mercy. The student that I mentioned a few minutes ago asking for mercy on the final exam. Well, if a student didn't study, didn't seek help, and basically just continued to let life pass them by when it had anything to do with the subject I was teaching about, they did not deserve to get a good grade on the test or assignment. They deserve to probably fail or get a very mediocre grade on the test or assignment, right? So is that someone that I really want to give mercy to, huh? Good question. Another trend that I've noticed in academia is that students who procrastinate feel the instructor should bail them out. And over the years, I have received quite a few last-minute emails desperate for a helping hand. Should I really be up at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night, eager to help my favorite procrastinators? Well, probably not. But did I do it anyway? In most cases, yes, I did. Well, why would I do that? Well, because I know young people, I know young adults. I worked with them for over 10 years. And because I know that life as an American young adult is more challenging than many people think. And furthermore, life as a university student is no picnic either. While my personal preference is to plan ahead and be prepared, I realized that that's not always possible, especially for young college students. So if simply responding to an email late at night can help someone get back on track, then I'm glad to be a part of that. And I'm glad to give them something that they maybe really don't deserve. So my approach was actually a combination of grace and mercy. Through grace, I would often provide the help that they didn't deserve at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. But through mercy, I always closely examined any question that I gave on a test that over half the class got wrong. So, if 60% of the class got question number 10 wrong, I would look at question number 10. I would look for typos, grammar errors, any conflicts with what was said in the textbook or notes I had provided. And if I convinced myself that the error was on my part as the teacher, then I willingly took the blame, and I often gave credit for more than one right answer for questions. So that was the mercy part, where I gave credit for things that students didn't deserve. However, I started to mention this earlier, even in the midst of grace and mercy, I didn't lose touch with my sense of reality. If I asked a question such as this, which of the following are pets? And the choices were dogs, cats, bird, and cheese, I would not be accepting cheese as a correct answer no matter what. No matter how much effort a student made to convince me that they actually had pet cheese, I was not giving in. So I would gladly take the other three answers, but not pet cheese. So there comes, a balance where you have to know when it's okay to give a little extra and when to hold your ground. So just like we looked at what life would be without grace, what would a life without mercy be like? I think it would be rigid, with no margin for error. And either you would need to perform with 100% accuracy, or you'd be considered a loser. There would be no teachers checking email late at night on a weekend. We would throw more people in jail and throw away the key. I'm sure you get the idea. There would be nothing given to you that you didn't deserve, that you didn't earn, that you didn't really work your butt off for. Unfortunately, I know that there are some parts of our world, of our country here in America, that already operate on a no mercy mentality. And there are unique cases where that is actually important. So there's certain types of jobs that require the development of people to be able to be really, really strong people. They are going to have to make hard decisions. Some of our soldiers are going to have to take the lives of other people. They need to be trained sometimes with a no mercy mentality. You need to do what I say, you need to do it now, and it's going to protect you and it's going to protect, others. So we do know that there are times when it's appropriate to not be giving a lot of mercy. And there are also extremes that go the other way, where people are all mercy and no accountability, and that's really not good either. It can often result in adults who can't accept blame or real consequences. If you try not to go to work for 2 weeks in a row, unless you have a legitimate doctor's note or are in the hospital, that's probably not going to be okay, and you're probably going to get yourself fired. So there are real consequences. We can't say, oh, Susie, it's okay that you just didn't feel like coming to work for the last 2 weeks. No, it's not. It's not okay. So, we have to look at the whole picture and not just be dispensing, mercy and grace constantly. But just like grace for optimal health benefits, we need to be both receivers and giver of mercy. So I'm sure you're wondering about that student that requested mercy on the final exam. Well, as a nursing professor, I was not really at liberty to give out any free points or bonus work. It's a tough profession. It's difficult to pass the nursing state boards. And due to job requirements and also the fact that we want to produce high-quality registered nurses who can provide excellent care to the population, I wasn't permitted to show much mercy. However, as I mentioned earlier, if I felt the blame was in any way on me, I took the responsibility and I would not punish the student. And as best I can recall, I believe there were 2 or 3 questions on that pharmacology test that were a bit on the vague side. And although the answers that I had listed as correct weren't wrong. These questions were actually a little too challenging for sophomore level students, and I really didn't see that until I was analyzing the final exam. So I did accept more than one answer as correct, and in most cases, each student in the class would receive 2 or 3 extra points. So it wasn't like people's grades were jumping tremendously. But to be fair, if something was not right, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. And my dear student who begged for mercy got a few of those extra points too. Additionally, that student passed the course, passed every course after that, and later went on to graduate and is now a high-quality registered nurse. So there are times when mercy is a good thing, and there's times when it may not be appropriate. Okay, moving on to our last part of today's episode, Dr. Terry's health tip and challenge of the week. So we really focused on 2 main things today, and we did them together instead of separating them apart. Grace and mercy go hand in hand. So now for our health tip and challenge of the week. Now it's time for you to take action. So I have 2 challenges for you this week, and I'd also love to hear your feedback if you're somebody who chooses to accept these challenges. So the first thing is I want you to find at least one way to show grace to someone in a situation where you would not be required or expected to this week. You have 7 days after listening to this podcast to follow through. Show grace to someone. And the second one is very similar. Find at least one way to show mercy to someone who doesn't deserve it in the next 7 days also. And keep in mind that social media is a great place to have a positive influence and let your grace and mercy shine. So a few reflection questions to send you on your way this week. Number 1, do you have barriers that are getting in the way of you freely receiving grace in your life? Is it time for you to speak to a counselor or trusted friend about issues that are getting in the way of your happiness and joy? Another reflection question, how much mercy do you show towards others in the course of a normal week? And lastly, is it time for you to dial up your mercy level a bit? So good questions, good things to think about for this following week. In wrapping it up, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to Breaking Through Health Barriers podcast so that you don't miss any episodes. And if video is more your style, you can also find my bi-weekly health mentoring moments on YouTube. I also retweet, repost, and periodically post original content on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Pinterest, so feel free to check those out too. This is Dr. Terry Wenner, and together we're going to break through as many health barriers as possible and live happier, healthy lives. Until next time, enjoy each and every day you're given.